ले यहाँ का
Okay, good afternoon. So today we will have our public health lectures. So could group 1 start by sharing their screen?
यहाँ का
Okay, or any group who's ready can go first. Okay, you can start.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Manan from Group 1, and our today's presentation is about HIV. So let's begin with it. So we'll start with the most basic question, like what is HIV? HIV is a virus that attacks the body's immune system. If HIV is not treated, it can lead to AIDS, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. Immune system is body's defense system. The immune system can control many viruses, but HIV targets it and infects the same immune system that protects us from infections and illnesses. These cells are a type of white blood cells called CD4 or T cells. Next slide. HIV usually take over CD4 cells and turn them into factories that produce millions of copies of the viruses. As the virus makes copies, it damages or kills the CD4 cells, weakening immune system. And this is how HIV causes AIDS. So basically, there are two strains of HIV divided into two groups. The first one is which one? The first one is most commonly in the worldwide, and the second one is mostly found in West Africa, Asia, and Europe. So now we come down to like where did this HIV come from? So it was it came from chimpanzee in Central Africa. The chimpanzee version of the virus was probably passed to humans when humans were hunting these chimpanzees for meat and came in contact with their infected blood. Over decades, HIV slowly spread across Africa and later into the other parts of the world. So, HIV transmission. HIV can only be transmitted through 5 body fluids: the breast milk, blood, rectal fluid, vaginal fluid, and semen. HIV transmission can be prevented There are ways to avoid and reduce contact with the body fluids that transmit HIV. And HIV do not spread through some of the body fluids like sweats, tears, saliva, feces, and urine. So, how this transmission occurs, like the methods of transmission, it occurs mainly through unprotected sex, drug addicts, blood transfusion, pregnancy, and non-sterile instruments. So, the first method is injecting drugs, like using needles and all. The second one is using tattoos and body piercing, and the next is through mother, like to child through mother during pregnancy or breastfeeding, and the last one is unprotected sex. So, what are the symptoms of HIV? Some people have flu-like symptoms within 2 to 4 weeks after infection, called acute HIV infection. These symptoms may last for a few days or several weeks. Possible symptoms include fevers, chills, rash, night sweats, muscle aches, sore throat, fatigue, swollen lymph nodes, and mouth ulcers. The only way to know for sure if a patient has HIV is to get laboratory tested. And although the virus can cause symptoms, they are not a reliable way if the patient is infected. In fact, in some people, they don't even have the symptoms. So even if a patient don't have a typical sign of infection, if he or she like doubts it, then they should get tested. So what are the stages of HIV? There are usually three stages. When people with HIV don't get treatment, they typically progress through these three stages. The first stage is acute, the second is chronic, and the third one is which we all call AIDS, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. So stage one of HIV, it is the acute HIV stage infection. People have a large amount of HIV in the blood and like they are very contagious. Some people have flu-like symptoms. This is body's natural response to infection, but most people don't feel sick right away or at all. In patients, if patients have flu-like symptoms and think they may have been exposed to HIV, should seek medical care and ask for a test to diagnose acute infection. Only antigen antibody test. Now we come down to stage two. This is the chronic HIV infection. This stage is asymptomatic in HIV infection or called clinical latency. HIV is still active but reproduces at a very low level. People may not have any symptoms or get sick during this stage without taking HIV medicine. This period may last a decade or longer, but some people may progress faster, like according to their immune system or how much it is damaged. The people can transmit HIV in this phase. At the end of this phase, the amount of HIV in the blood, called the viral load, goes up and the CD4 cells goes down. The person may have symptoms as a virus levels increase in the body and the person moves into the stage 3. People who take HIV medicine as prescribed may never move into stage 3. So this is the final stage, the acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, the most severe phase of HIV infection. People with AIDS have such badly damaged immune system that they can, when they get an increased number of severe illnesses called opportunity infections. People receive an AIDS diagnosis when their CD4 cell count drops below 200 cells per millimeter, or if they develop certain opportunistic infections. People with AIDS can have a high viral load and can be very infectious. Without treatment, people with AIDS typically survive only about 3 years. Now, the causes and the risk factors. HIV is caused by a virus known as retrovirus. It works by targeting immune cells called CD4 cells or T cells. If they are responsible for instigating immune response. If one of the CD4 cells get infected, the virus will turn into a HIV producing factory by hijacking their genetic machinery. As the infected cell dies, the newly emergent viruses will go on to infect other CD4 cells. By progressively targeting and killing these cells, the body becomes less and less able to defend itself against infection. When the immune defense are compromised, serious and potential life-threatening opportunistic infections can develop, and this is the stage of infection commonly known as AIDS, acute, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. Even though HIV is transmitted through body fluids, not all body fluids are capable of transmitting disease. Some fluids like saliva and urine contain a high level of enzymes or acids that prevents HIV from thriving. Once outside of the body, the virus is unable to survive for very long. The virus must come in contact with mucosal tissue, such as found in the rectum or vagina, or enter the body through broken skin and in sufficient quantities to establish an infection. If anyone of any age, race, sex, or sexual orientation can be infected with the HIV or AIDS, a person is at great risk if they are having unprotected sex, injecting drug use, the sharing of needles and syringes, uh, or it can happen if a child is being born like during pregnancy or breastfeeding through mother to child. And there are three circumstances in which birthing parent with HIV can pass the virus to the baby during pregnancy, delivery, and breastfeeding. Needle stick. The next is the needle stick injuries, sometimes referred as sharp injuries, can expose a person to tainted body or body fluid. Risk is concerned for healthcare workers because they are very vulnerable to blood-borne infections from patients. The next one is blood transfusion. In the early days of the AIDS pandemic, blood transfusion was common cause of HIV infections. The next one is tattooing or body piercing. Now, these are the additional risk factors. The first one is anal sex. The anal sex is one of the most effective routes of transmission because rectal tissues are delicate and easily can be broken. Unlike the vagina, the rectal canal only has a single layer of cells, overlying tissue that are rich in CD4 cells. The people who have a high viral load, this increases the risk of transmission. And the next one is the sexually transmitted infections. The STIs commonly occur with HIV and can facilitate infection in different ways. Certain STI, like syphilis, can cause ulcers that provide HIV easy access into the body. The STIs also trigger an inflammatory response that draws immune cells to the site of the infection, providing more CD cells for the virus to target and get hijacked, getting hijacked their genetic machinery. And the next additional factor is having multiple partners. The more sexual partners a person have, the greater opportunity, the greater chances are there to get HIV positive. And the last two are spermicides and douching. The vaginal and anal douching strips cause mucus that provide some protection against HIV. And the current evidence suggests that anal douching is potentially carcinogenic. Now I would like to call Amisha to take over.
For diagnosis of HIV, blood tests are the most common ways to diagnose. These tests look for antibodies to the virus that the body creates in an attempt to fight the virus. People exposed to the virus should get tested immediately, although it can take the body anywhere from 6 weeks to a year to develop antibodies to the virus. Test for HIV and AIDS. ELISA test. It is used to detect HIV infection. If an ELISA test is positive, the Western blot test is usually administered to confirm the diagnosis. And if it's negative, but you think you may have HIV, you should be tested again in 1 to 3 months. ELISA is quite sensitive in chronic HIV infection, but because antibodies aren't produced immediately upon infection, you may test negative during a window of a few weeks to a few months after being infected. Even though your test results may be negative during this window period, you may have a high level of the virus and be at risk of transmitting infection. Home test. The only home test approved by the US Food and Drug Administration is called Home Access Express test, which is sold in pharmacies. Saliva test. A cotton pad is used to obtain saliva from the inside of your cheeks, and the pad is placed in a vial and submitted to the laboratory for testing. The results are available in 3 days, and positive results should be confirmed with a blood test. Viral load test. This test measures the amount of HIV in your blood. Generally, it is used to monitor treatment progress or detect early HIV infection. Three technologies measure HIV viral load in the blood that are RT-PCR, bDNA, and NASBA. The basic principle for these tests are similar. HIV is detected using DNA sequence that bind specifically to those in the virus. It is important to note that results may vary between tests. Western blot. It is a very sensitive blood test used to confirm a positive ELISA test result. An antibody antigen blood test checks for levels of both HIV antibodies and the P24 antigens. This test can detect the virus as early as 3 weeks after getting infected. Follow-up tests are also called confirmatory tests. They are usually done when the screening test is positive. Treatment. The treatment for HIV is called ART, that is antiretroviral therapy. It involves taking a combination of HIV medicines every day. The first line ART regimes consist of 2 NRTI and 1 NNRI, while second line consists of ritonavir boosted lopinavir with 2 NRTI. ART is recommended for everyone who has HIV. People with HIV should start taking HIV medicines as soon as possible. And if it cannot cure HIV, but HIV medicines help people with HIV to live longer, healthier lives. It also reduces the risk of HIV transmission. How can we prevent occupational HIV transmissions? We can follow standard precautions at all times. Assume that blood and other body fluids are potentially infectious. Use gloves, goggles, and other barriers when anticipating contact with blood or body fluids. Wash hands and other skin surfaces immediately after contact with blood or body fluids. Be careful when handling and disposing of sharp instruments during or after use. Use safety devices to prevent needle stick injuries and dispose of used needles or other sharp objects in containers. Today, more tools than ever are available to prevent HIV. You can use strategies such as abstinence, never sharing needles, or using condoms the right way every time you have sex. Protect yourself during sex. You can't get HIV from sexual activities that don't involve contact with body fluids that are semen, vaginal fluid, or blood, and you must use protective methods while having sexual intercourse. Prevent mother to child transmission. Get tested for HIV as soon as possible to know your status. The earlier HIV is diagnosed and treated, the more effectively HIV medicines will prevent transmission to your baby. If you are at risk for HIV, get tested again in your third trimester. And if you have HIV and are taking HIV medicines as prescribed throughout pregnancy and childbirth, and give HIV medicines to your baby for 4 to 6 weeks after giving birth. The risk of transmitting HIV can be 1% or less. After delivery, you can prevent transmitting HIV to your baby by avoiding breastfeeding. Thank you.
Okay, so HIV is one of the pandemics that occurred early 80s, 90s. Now, not so much because treatments available, etc., etc., but the stigma is still there. So we still have to put it at the back of our heads. Remember, when you are doing public health lecture, it's different from the reporting that you usually do in class. Pick out the important things that you want to convey to your audience so that you emphasize on what they need to learn. Because if you give them all the data, like what you did, they will not be able to remember all. Okay, just a little tip. Okay, if you are using visuals, especially if it's online, make sure that it's readable. Give ample size to your PowerPoint. Okay, next group.
Doctora, may I also add?
Good afternoon, Doc El Rey. And when you are reporting, please open your cameras. Don't forget. Yes, Doc El Rey.
Yes, good afternoon, Doctor. Good afternoon to everyone. Public health forum or a discussion like this should also emphasize the current health programs conducted by or implemented by the government in such a way you will also able to um, give informations the accessibility of resources available for your public for your community. Okay, so do not fail to mention whatever health programs or available resources that
For example,
your target audience would able to avail. Okay.
for HIV, you at the end you
Mhm.
will say where do they go to, either to their doctor or to a health
Yeah.
center. You direct them.
Yes.
Next group.
Okay. Next group.
Arvind, can you please make it as a slideshow? Hello.
Yes. Go ahead.
Bro, can you please make it as a slideshow? There is an option after the animation. Anyone from group 2?
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Sandeep Ansari from Group 2. We have chosen our topic as suicide impacts on public health. The epic story of tomorrow can't be written if it ends today. Can you please move to the next slide? In the past, suicide was addressed by providing mental health service to people who were already experiencing or showing signs of suicidal thoughts or behavior. Like during the past, many of them used to go have committed a suicide due to their mental problems and their pressure on their lives. Okay, when surveys such as therapy and hospitalization are critical for those who may be thinking about or who have made a suicide attempt, they do not prevent suicidal thoughts or behaviors from happening in the first place. In the previous, they used to try to stop them by stopping their thoughts about suicidal thoughts, so that they could have prevent. Next slide, please. There are few approaches in suicidal prevention. Like first one is population approach. Part of public health board's view in emphasis on population health, not just the rate of individuals. Suicide has been typically treated as an individual experience, like example hospitalization and individual therapy by psychologists or psychiatrists. However, its consequences and potential solutions also affect society in general. Example, economic impact of loss or labor force. They used to have the Native American Rehabilitation Association of the Northwest (NARA) has developed the Life Scared starter kit with resources of your youth service providers. These resources focus on the core message of culture as prevention and provide concrete action parents and family members can take to promote resilience in American and Indian Alaska Native youth. And not also that, it goes beyond a focus on individual to include peace, family, community, and society as a whole. Example like district-wide training and suicidal awareness. Prevention for all teachers, administration, and other school personnel. Next slide, please. Primary prevention. Public health emphasis efforts in prevent suicide before it occurs. This approach requires not only reducing the factors that put people at risk, but also increasing the factors that prevent people from engaging in suicidal behavior. It occurs before harm is done. Like example, prevention program for parents and youth that focuses on building positive relationships and the protective benefits of family and community support. Next slide, please. And then we have commitment to science. Like public health monitors and tracks suicide trends, researches risks and protective factors, evaluate intravenous and determines how best to implement effective intravenous moving science action and vice versa. This means knowing where to look for community data and research information about risk and protective factors for suicidal behavior. For the example, like state and national data, www.cdc.government injury, and risk factors and protective factors, www.cdc.government /violence prevention, registry of evaluated programs, website for www.nrepp.samhsa.government. Next slide, please. Multidisciplinary perspective. Public health includes many disciplines and perspectives which helps in addressing complex diagnosis suicide. Public health often serve as a convening role in bringing together representatives from sectors such as health, media, business, criminal justice, behavioral science, epidemiology, social science, and education, which all have important roles to play in suicide prevention. Which means strategies addressing suicide prevention include many types of organizations. Example, a small school district convenes a suicidal prevention advisory council that includes the local public health department, hospitals, law enforcement, and mental health providers, the local chamber of commerce, faith-based on community, youth serving organizations, substance abuse treatment, etc. Next slide, please. Uh, when it comes to Indian scenario, India ranks 43rd in descending order of rates of suicide with a rate of 10.4 by lakhs reported in 2019. About one third of suicides over the world happen in India. In 2019, the suicidal rate among males was 3.7 times higher, 22.4 per 1 lakh, than among females, 6.0 per 1 lakh. Next slide, please. According to NCRB, National Crimes Record Bureau, 1.39 lakh Indians died by suicide in the year of 2019, in which 67% were young adults. Andaman and Nicobar Islands reported highest rates of suicide, 45.0, followed by Sikkim 42.5, Chhattisgarh 26.4, and Puducherry 26.3, and Kerala 24.0. Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, and Telangana also have reported high rates of suicide. Next slide, please. And what are the risk factors of suicide? Who is at risk for the suicide? People of all genders, ages, and clinical ethnicities can be risk for suicide. The main risk factors for suicide are the history of suicide attempts, depression, other mental disorders or substance use disorder, chronic pain, family history of mental disorder or substance use, family history of suicide. A history of suicide attempts means the person who is having a history when he had several attempts to a suicide, depression and other mental disorders, and substance abuse. Please, can you go back to the previous slide? And chronic pain, when someone is having suffering from a chronic pain, they wanted to attempt a suicide. This is one of the example of chronic pain. Family history or mental disorder or substance use. By using the substance drugs, they can they don't know what they're doing. They will be unconscious, so that they'll commit suicide. Family history of suicide. Next slide, please. Exposure to family violence, including physical or sexual abuse, presence of guns or other firearms in the house, having recently been released from prison or jail, exposure either directly or indirectly to other suicidal behavior such as that family members, peers, or celebrities, stressful life events such as the loss of loved one, legal troubles, and financial difficulties, and interpersonal stresses such as shame, harassment, bullying, discrimination, or relationship troubles may contribute to suicidal risk, especially when they occur along with the suicide risk factors. These all considerations will be taken if one is committing a suicide. Next slide, please. Protective factors. Some of the protective factors for suicidal avoidance is coping skills, self-efficiency, problem-solving skills, optimism, personal control, belonging, self-support, social support, access to resources, intra-consciences, marriages, community, spiritual affiliation, participation, okay to seek help. Next slide, please. Common methods. Worldwide, there are few common methods. Three suicide methods predominant with a pattern varying in different countries. These are hanging, poisoning by pesticides, and firearms. Other common suicide methods include jumping from a great height during overdose and drowning. This means suicide attempts are they can hang to the fan which is to the ceiling, and fire use of firearms such as guns in their house, and other common suicide methods like jumping from a hill or somewhere from a building due to high overdoses of their drugs. The most frequently used method of suicide were different in two groups of attempts and competitors. Among attempters, the most frequent method is drug poisoning or overdose. For completers, ranging is the most common method. Drug poisoning and other chemical poisoning were evaluated as relatively non-lethal compared to other suicidal methods. Next slide, please. Hanging. Suicide by hanging by a suspension from an anchor point, such as an overhead beam or hook, by a rope or cord by jumping from a height with a nose and under the neck. Often considered as a simple method that does not require complicated technique. Common methods for completers have been high mortality rate of about 70%. Firearm suicide. Although guns are not the most common method by which people attempt suicide, they are the most lethal. About 85% of the suicide attempts of firearm end in the death. They often don't have time to reconsider their action or summon help. Once the trigger is pulled, there is no turning back. Next slide, please. Poisoning is among one of the most common means used by suicidal individuals to attempt suicide, and in females, in the leading mechanism used to commit suicide. Nearly 70% of individuals who die by suicide consume a substance prior to death. The most poisoning involve prescription medication, and that opioid prescriptions have dramatically increased. It relates more to the developed countries. Poisoning by pesticide injection is common in low and middle income countries by agricultural pesticides, particularly in rural areas. The problem is most severe in rural Asian countries where a wider range of agriculture, highly hazardous pesticides, HHPS, are easily available within the home and from shops. They are often used impulsively for suicide attempts in times of acute stress, frequent with less than 30 minimum of planning, and when there is a loss of their farms or fields, and they have been in depth so that they can use these pesticides as a suicidal process. Next slide, please. Jumping from height. It is usually considered to be a violent method of suicide, usually done from a dangerous location such as a high window, balcony, roof, cliff, dam, or bridge, etc. The person who chooses this method are usually regarded as having strong self-destructive motivation, and survivors are considered to have failed suicide. People using violent suicide methods should be distinguished from those using methods carrying minimal risk to life or those with multiple self-harm behavior. Next slide, please. Drowning. It is rather uncommon method. The person who commits suicide by drowning is commonly portrayed as a lonely, disturbed individual who, after completing the life has dealt with, throws himself off the local suspension bridge to end it all. In reality, the victim is this scenario may die or of other causes, such as hypothermia, mechanical injury, or blunt force trauma due to the fall. Next slide, please. Stages of suicide: ideation, threatening, and attempting. Ideation. A person first considers the idea of suicide, but the desire to live is stronger than desire to die. It means the person may still have fear of death. Next slide, please. Threatening. A person accepts suicide as a real opinion and may begin to plan his or her death. It means a person may not want to die but sees no other choice. Attempting. A person has decided to kill themselves. Next slide. These three are some of the factors of suicidal next thing. Diagnosis. The present task by Fatina Mira.
Okay, so diagnosis of suicide includes the following: mental health condition, physical health conditions, as well as alcohol and drug abuse. So the question is, why is it important to highlight the diagnosis of suicide? It is because it can help to determine what may be the cause of suicidal thinking and to determine the best treatment. This is because despite an increase in the treatment of suicidal person over the past decades, incident rates of suicidal behavior have remained largely unchanged. Improvements on surveillance system through epidemiological studies by examining the cross-national prevalence of suicidal behaviors. So times keeps on changing, and therefore an update review of this topic is also needed. Next. So we are aware of the conventional treatments towards suicidal tendencies, such as psychotherapy, medications such as antidepressants, addiction treatment, as well as family support and education. But have you thought about how the pandemic, the COVID-19, can lead to suicidal ideation? Such are because of the causes of social restriction, feeling of loneliness, domestic violence can also fuel tendency to commit suicide. That brings me to my final slide, prevention. There are few methods as listed as shown in the slide where suicidal rates have been reduced. But we are living in the era of the pandemic. So yesterday, I just read an article by the news on the 8th of April 2022 that the death of suicide has doubled as compared to last year in the 2020 in the Philippines itself. To end this presentation, how does suicide impact public health community? So suicide and suicidal attempts affect the health and well-being of friends, loved ones, co-workers, and the community. So when people die by suicide, their surviving family members, friends may experience shock, anger, guilt, symptoms of depression or anxiety, and may have even experienced thoughts of suicidal themselves. So that's the end of presentation. Thank you for listening.
Okay, before we ask any questions from the floor. Any questions?
Yes, ma'am. I would like to ask a question towards the group two. Why generally people get the suicidal thoughts? I would like to know that.
Can I please answer that?
Yeah, sure, sure.
Generally, people want to commit suicide when they are lonely in their life, or some due to harassment or bullying happened in their life, and like if they have some financial crisis or something like that. That's it, doctor.
Yeah.
Any
fine.
more question, please?
Is it just that?
No,
or,
no.
Or
Yes, ma'am. That's it.
for example, you have your different nationalities would have different propensities for committing suicide. For example, all of us experienced the COVID pandemic, but there are some countries which experience more suicide attempts than others because of the pandemic. What would account for that? Okay, so it is not just risk factors. And is suicide a diagnosis? Does it have an ICD classification? Or suicidal ideation could be. Right?
Yes,
But
doctor.
again, a sensitive topic that barely discussed. And
Yes,
if
doctor.
ever it is discussed,
No, doctor. It's
reasons
rarely
are
discussed.
often glossed over. Yes, ano, sorry?
It's a rarely discussed topic, doctor, which is very sensitive.
Yes. And we have to be on the lookout because there are a lot of people who are highly functional, but they are depressed. And these are usually the perfectionists. You think that their lives are okay, that they're perfectly fine, but because of the increased demand that they have for themselves, they will end up committing suicide. Doc
May
El Ray?
May I add something to
Yes.
that? Yesterday, I read an article and it says that majority of the people who has depression, especially during the pandemic, before then, they didn't even had any behaviors like depression. They didn't had bipolar disorder. They just had depression because of COVID. Yeah, so maybe a lot of research are looking into that. User research.
Yes. Doc El Ray?
Yeah, so you actually able to touch the factors that one can lead to depression. Yeah, we understand that, but we also had to stress out that there are some situation wherein depression can be actually an organic matter. It doesn't actually has to do with some or it could also be an underlying condition. No, the patient might be having a different or have other disease that can also lead to depression and then eventually also suicide. So there are things that you need to look into when you talk about mental health, especially suicide. And in the perspective of community and preventive medicine, we try to integrate this, what you have learned in clinical, when you try to communicate with the public. Okay, and that is what your public health. And again, it is uh, it can also have to deal with the ethical point of view wherein with respect to certain differences, no, as mentioned by Dr. Andres, that cultural has also something to do with, or the nationalities, different nationalities has something to do with how they view a suicide or how they view a mental health problem such as like this. No, would you know that actually suicide is actually an honorable
Japanese.
means, yeah, in South Korea or even maybe in Japan, and these things are, we can also see that there also have a high prevalence in this kind of on this part of the countries, no?
Yes.
So
They,
these are the things that you need to look into when you're doing something like public health report. Okay.
yes, because these cultures will rather face death before dishonor. And that is what their mantra is. That's what their culture calls. That's why most would, if for example they are seen to be corrupt, there's scandal, you would often see public officials committing suicide because their honor, if it's already tainted, it's much worse than death. All right. Okay. Okay, good. Let's have the next group.
Yes, doctor, we are sharing the screen. Everyone able to see my screen?
Yes, Vaishnavi.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Today, our topic we took for the presentation is malaria. How our India is battling against this, and here we particularly focus this completely towards the India. Why? Because after our medicine, we as a foreign medical graduate, we need to give an exam in India, which is general called FMGE exam. So in that exam, we will have a subject how we call here PMCH. In India, it's called PSM. So there were many questions which are asked about these policies of the society, sorry, government, and how India is battling against different diseases. As it is a presentation, we can't show every disease. So we took the important topic which is very concerning India nowadays. That's malaria. And main thing is, all the April is the month where the National Malaria Day falls. So that's the reason why we took this topic. My group mates will go ahead with the policies and the missions and the goals which are implemented and which were to be implemented by India for next 10 or 12 years. And India is planning by 2030 to make India as malaria-free country. So now I will start the slideshow. 1 second. See, we all know the World Malaria Day is on April 25th, which is coming. And the theme for this World Malaria Day, the WHO given that harness innovation to reduce the malaria burden and save lives. Harness innovation means they are going to implement a lot of missions, a lot of goals, and a lot of measures which will help the world to decrease and reduce the burden and the deaths due to malaria. So now my group mates will continue the presentation.
Yes, Vaishnavi, thank you. Now, from this point, I would like to continue the presentation. Next slide. Yeah. So now, basically, before talking about the community health, we need to get a complete idea what malaria is basically and how it is transmitted and all those things. So here we have highlighted a few points. Like, firstly, we all know malaria is a protozoan infection of the red blood cells and it's transmitted by the bite of a female Anopheles mosquito. Now it is causing a widespread problem which leads to death, also disabilities. And if you see in a community ways or for a country, it costs a lot of economic losses also. Now it also contributes to maternal deaths, stillbirths, and low birth weight in infants, as young children, pregnant women have little or no immunity towards this disease. So that's why there are more maternal deaths to be seen with with the people who are having malaria. Stillbirths are also seen, and their low birth weight in infants is also basically seen. Next slide. Now the most fatal form of malaria, which accounts from almost all of the malaria related deaths, is Plasmodium falciparum, and it had a rising rate since the 1980s in India. Now in 2009, the India's public health system reported around 1.5 million malarial cases, like this a number of cases in 2009 basically. And the major areas or the states of India which are affected by malaria or are prone to malaria are the poorest places, like no, poorest in the sense that they are having most of the areas to be covered with forest, or they are like many people are living as tribals. So this is the Orissa, Jharkhand, and Chhattisgarh. These are basically the remote rural areas. So there the malaria is more prevalent. Next slide. Now we're going to look at the epidemiological profile of malaria in India. Next slide. So this is a picture in which the places are divided basically on the type of forest they have, such as if we go on the northeastern side, we have mostly the evergreen forest. If we look in the south, we are going to have the deciduous forests more. In the middle part of the central India, we have deciduous forests which are wet, and in the south we have dry kind of things, forest. In the western side, we have arid or semi-arid forest. So these are the Anopheles types of mosquitoes which are prevalent in those particular states. So one by one I will be discussing later on. Next slide. Now firstly we'll discuss about Anopheles culicifacius. Is back. Yeah, it is basically widespread in the peninsular India, and it is highly zoophilic, as a result of which the presence of a high density of cattle relative to that of human limits its vectorial capacity. Means it is, as it is zoophilic, so there is a limit to its vectorial capacity of this species. Next slide. Next, that is Anopheles stephensi. It is basically shares breeding sites with the Anopheles culicifacius, and it has developed a strong propensity for artificial containers and responsible for malaria in urban and industrial areas. Like we know that there are basically when there's water collection in some containers, or like for many longer periods, so they tend to develop eggs of that. Mosquitoes, and basically that could also lead to malaria of this particular species. Next is Anopheles fluviatilis is the main vector of malaria, occupying in the hilly areas, forests, and forest fringe areas in many states, especially in the eastern part of the country. So as I showed in the map, we had evergreen forest basically in the northern eastern side. So there maybe this mosquito is more prevalent, this species. Anopheles minimus is the vector responsible for malaria occurring foothills of northeastern states of the country. Next, Anopheles dirus, an important forest vector in the northeast as well, is well known for its exophilic behavior. Exophilic behavior means living outside of human habitations. As we have seen that in the northeastern parts, they are mostly covered with evergreen forest areas. So many are not inhabited by humans. So the cases of this Anopheles dirus are not that prevalent as of the other species. Then we have Anopheles epiroticus, a brackish water breeder, is restricted to causing malaria in the UT of Andaman and Nicobar Islands. This is this is exclusively for the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Now, I won't be getting into detail with the pathophysiology because we all know about it. So the two major things is the infective stage, which is the mosquito takes a blood meal and which injects the sporocytes in the body. That is the infective stage. And if you go to the diagnostic stage, we have the gametocytes, so that which are found in the blood. So that is the diagnostic stage for the malaria. Next slide. Now here we will be discussing about the core strategies for malarial malaria prevention and control. So first, the core strategy firstly is surveillance and case management. The components of it would be including the case detection, then the early diagnosis and complete treatment of that. Sentinel surveillance means that, and we find various indicators of a presence of a particular disease. So we would be searching for those indicators that would be putting into a surveillance for malaria. Then is epidemic preparedness and early response. Now, for second core strategy is integrated vector management, which includes indoor residual spraying, insecticide-treated bed nets, long-lasting insecticide-treated nets, anti-larval measures, including source reduction. So these are all the measures which should be taken for management for or a control of the malarial spread. Next, lastly, is the supporting interventions, capacity building. So this capacity building word means that it's a process of developing and strengthening the skills, process, and resources that organizations need to survive, adapt, and thrive in a fast changing world. So basically, we are always in a state of evolve, like we evolve every time. So we need to have some modifications or adaptations in the whole process, so that we could be thriving against this fast changing world. Next is the behavior change communication. There should be behavioral changes taken up by the people as to control this spread or its prevention. Basically, intersectoral collaboration. This basically means that not only the government but many non-government organizations, non-profit organizations, private or any health sector organizations, all would be clubbing together, and it would be a joint action taken for the prevention of this malarial or to control the malarial spread. Then we have monitoring and evaluation that should be always be done, because we should be updated about the current changes. Lastly, operational research and applied field research. Research is always important to know the new modifications or new things uh, coming up in the malarial prevention and control, which could direct in the us for the future ways which should be taking place. Now from here on, my teammate Ashmit would continue. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Myself Bansala Smith, and today I will talk about government policies and new approach taken to control malaria. So, first, in 1953, Government of India launches the National Malaria Control Program (NMCP) with focus on indoor residual spraying of DDT. DDT is, we know, that diphenyl trichloroethane. And next, in 1958, National Malaria Eradication Program was introduced. So, to further reduce the number of malaria cases and eliminate death from the disease. Next. In 1997, the government of India shifted its focus from eradication of malaria to control of disease. And in 2003, National Vector-Borne Disease Control Program was introduced, which was in this program, malaria control was integrated with other vector-borne disease because it shares common control strategies such as chemical control, environment management, biological control, and personal protection strategies. In 2005, National Rural Health Mission was introduced, especially for the rural part of the country to control the malarial cases in the rural areas. Next. Now we will talk about how World Bank supports Government of India in controlling malaria. Between 1997 and 2005, a malaria control project partially funded by IDA credit was implemented in selected states and districts. The project supported the government's shift from trying to control the mosquito to prevention, early detection and treatment of the human cases. While indoor residual spraying was to be more targeted and employ more environmentally neutral options, the use of larvae fish and biolarvae was encouraged, and the use of insecticide-treated mosquito nets was increased. Next. At the project end, while most project districts recorded a decline in the incidence of the disease, it also became clear that fundamental changes were required in operation of the program. So, according to the NVBCP, the number of malaria cases in India declined from 2.66 million in 1997 to 1.86 million in 2003. Now, last we talk about new approaches to malaria control, which are taken after 2003. So these were the adoption of long-lasting insecticides-treated nets in 2009, case management by mobilization of voluntary community workers, like I talk about in the NRHF. There are whole health factors that health facility can't be available at the rural areas. So Asha, the voluntary community help in rural areas to control malaria. Next, use of rapid diagnostic kits to get result early and start treatment as soon as possible. Next. Due to resistance against chloroquine, government has now taken a policy decision to discontinue presumptive treatment of malaria. As now in India, there are now chloroquine is resistant in India, malaria in India. Next, for confirm uncomplicated fulcrum test, ACT, artemisinin based combination therapy should be given. Except in pregnant women and first trimester, they should be treated with quinine. Recently, government banned monotherapies with artemisinin to prevent the development of resistance to the drug. Government, with the help of private healthcare providers and social marketing, started to aware people about risk factors of malaria. Next, in 2018, the government introduced a new slogan against the malaria, which was "Bite Back Against Malaria." Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Myself Shravya, and today I will be discussing about the national framework for malaria elimination in India from 2016 to 30. Next, the milestones and targets for national framework for malaria elimination in India are by the end of 2016, all states and union territories have included malaria elimination in their broader health policies and planning framework. By 2020, the transmission of malaria is interrupted and zero indigenous cases and deaths due to malaria attained in all 15 states and union territories. Next, please. By 2022, an estimated reduction in malaria of 30 to 35% at national level compared with 2014. By 2024, all states and union territories and their respective districts reduce annual parasite index of less than 1 case per 1,000 population at risk and sustain zero deaths due to malaria while maintaining fully functional malaria surveillance. By 2027, the indigenous transmission of malaria in India is interrupted. Next one. By 2030, the re-establishment of local transmission prevented in areas where malaria has been eliminated. The malaria-free status maintained throughout the nation. India initiates the process of WHO certification of malaria elimination. Next, please. Challenges faced in malaria control in India. Next one. The key challenges faced in malarial control are population movements, often uncontrolled across states, union territories, and sharing large international borders with neighboring malaria endemic countries. Next, please. Next, shortage of skilled human resources. The program is adversely affected by an insufficient number of sanctioned posts of health workers and other program staff in different parts of the country. Insecticide resistance. The extensive use of insecticides, particularly DDT, under the vector control program controlled malaria to a great extent, but exerted high selection pressure on the vector population to develop resistance. That's it from our side. Thank you.
Okay, any questions from the floor, comments?
Yes, doctor.
Yes, go ahead.
Hello.
Yes,
How conscious India people about preventing malaria?
Kiran, I would like to answer this question. We have seen in our day-to-day like home in our homes also that we have home remedies also, like we use those things like some what do you say, those the homeopathic stuff, like some bark of a tree or those stuff to like burn those tree to keep the mosquitoes at bay. Then we also do like the mosquito nets are very popular in India, so which helps prevent the malaria or like mosquito bites basically. Then nextly we have We have, yeah, that one also. The people like the mothers or like the ladies, they always tend to drain the waters which are like clogged after the rainy season is past. So that is also a measure which is taken to prevent the eggs or the larval eggs to be blooming in the waters, stagnant waters. Then we have always instructed to like put on those lotions or creams, like in India we have Odomos creams to like whenever we go out in the evening or whatever time. So these are a few measures which India is like at the home basis, like in a particular, like at a very low level I'm talking about. So these are like in prevalent in every each and every house. So I feel in that measures also India is kind of taking it. So but they are really far away from the like totally eradication thing, but these are a few preventive measures taken. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, good afternoon.
Sige, mauna ka na, Doc Elry.
Yes, ma'am. Sorry. This group were able to tackle some of the government programs
Yes.
and measures taken.
Yeah, well appreciated.
Yes, and it's actually good to know that you are all aware of this. However, what are the challenges that they usually met if we are actually implementing such programs? And why is it that there's still a lot of regions in India still suffer the burden of the disease despite of all the programs being implemented?
Sir, generally, I like the question. The one main thing is, sir, yes, India is a very large country, and we have many facilities, we have many implementation of the programs, sir. But there is a little bit of negligence in the government that as an Indian, I surely agree that. And one more thing, sir, even we implement a program and we schedule several persons for that, the persons are really not responsible and they are a little bit very careless towards the program. The main thing is that even they have the skill, they don't show that, and they, little bit corruption and like that things will affect India. Main thing, mainly the main things we are facing, main problems why even we have this many goals and missions and even standards, even there are good researchers. The main thing is that India is little bit corrupted. And one more thing, negligence towards the people. And in India, people mostly prefer to go like USA, for example, sir. For example, if I graduate in Philippines and if I want to choose a career, generally not me, generally I'm saying, sir, most of the people, they show more preference towards US, England, and that is the question I always think, why as an Indian, why we can't say okay? They say even India did not give us seat to study in India, but it's okay. We are the citizens of that country. So this is such an attitude which is interrupting many programs and creating problems, or even we have very much skills and good people in India.
Sir, I would also like to add Vaishnavi's point that many times the government is trying to implement many of its programs, but we have many strong beliefs also. Like in the places which I talked about, like the places with forest areas, there are many people think that we won't be. They are having strong belief that we won't be able to cut the forest. We want, like it's a taboo or something. So many times those government plans are stopped due to the people's belief. So that could also lead to like accumulation of the, like if you say the prevalence of mosquito, so that stops or cuts off government from approaching those areas. And we have a lot population in India which is covered under those areas, such as the northeastern side, if we go the forest areas and all. So the government has many challenges also to be faced, but many times it also shows negligence. So it's a both way, like a two-way thing which is going on. So that's why there is so much prevalence till date in India.
Okay, very good. How about the funding? Are we lacking? The government is actually putting enough funding to support such programs, or is it actually also the problem with the local government and not the central government?
Yeah, sir. Main thing is, sir, if the central government is, for example, giving them 2 lakhs, sir, till it come to the local government and till it come to the workers of that particular mission, it will become 200 rupees. Like that's an example, sir, how the corruption is in India. So even there are enough funds, sir. However, India is a very big country. The income will be of course big, and the population and the tax, everything. But even instead of having these many funds and sources, that there is lacking of correctness in the people, genuinity to provide a particular service, and it won't reach to the people completely, sir, like to that mission particularly. So it's really a problem, sir. Even center is providing a good fund, but till it come to the state government or a particular local government, it will be always wasted.
All right. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you, sir.
thank you. Nothing more. Appreciated that you included the government's program. That's what we are looking more of and relate it to your report. Okay, next group.
Good afternoon, everyone. Our topic for this discussion is healthcare associated infections. Healthcare associated infections were earlier known as nosocomial infections, and the term is derived from nosus, meaning disease, and commune means to take care of. Healthcare associated infections are infections people get while they are receiving healthcare for another condition. This can happen in any healthcare facility, including hospitals, ambulatory surgical centers, end-stage renal disease facilities, and long-term care facilities. HAI are a significant cause of increased morbidity and mortality in hospitalized patients. In addition, HAI inconvenient for the patients and constitute huge economical burden on healthcare system. For patients, mainly infections that the first appear 48 hours or more after hospital admission or within 30 days after discharge are considered for HAI. Also, occupational infections among staff is also considered as HAI. Several studies suggest that simple infection control procedures such as cleaning hands with an alcohol-based hand rub can help prevent HAIs and save lives, reduce morbidity, and minimize healthcare cost. Statistics for HAI. On any given day, about 1 in 31 hospital patients has at least one healthcare associated infections. Approximately affects 10% of all inpatients, delays the discharge, cost twice more than if there is no infection, show increasing trend among patients and staff. Studies have shown that HAI prevalence varies from 3.8% to 19.6% depending on the population surveyed, with a pooled global prevalence of 10.1%. Indian scenario. HAIs account for major causes of death, functional disability, emotional suffering, and economic burden among hospitalized patients. In India, major health services are given by government hospitals. Unfortunately, very limited HAI data is available from government hospitals to assess the actual burden of HAI in India. Incidence rate for this is average incidence is 10% to 30%, but maybe still higher in ICU. UTIs are, when used with catheter related, are 38%. Surgical site infections or wound infections stand for 19%. Pneumonia is 17%, and bloodstream infections is 7% to 16%. Risk factors. Prolonged use of invasive devices, inappropriate use of antibiotics, high risk and sophisticated procedures, immunosuppression, severe underlying patient conditions, admission to the ICU, insufficient application of standard and isolation precautions, inadequate infection control and prevention measures. All hospitalized patients are susceptible to contracting a nosocomial infection. Some patients are at greater risk than others, like younger children, the elderly, and person with compromised immune systems are most likely to get an infection. Other risk factors are long hospital stays, the use of indwelling catheters, failure of healthcare workers to wash their hands, and overuse of antibiotics. Methicillin resistant Staphylococcus aureus, Pseudomonas aeruginosa, and other non-pseudomonal gram-negative bacteria are the most common causes.
So moving on to the mode of transmission, the modes of disease transmission include direct and indirect. The direct one has the direct contact and the droplet spread of the transmission. And in moving to indirect, there are three types of transmission, which include airborne, vehicle-borne, and vector-borne. In the vector-borne, there is mechanical vector-borne and biological vector-borne. So in direct contact transmission, an infectious agent is transferred from a reservoir to a susceptible host by direct contact or droplet spread. In droplet spread transmission, it refers to a spray with relatively large, short-range aerosols produced by sneezing, coughing, or even talking. So the droplet spread is classified as direct because transmission is by direct spray over a few feet before the droplets fall to the ground. So moving to the indirect transmission, the indirect transmission refers to the transfer of an infectious agent from a reservoir to the host by suspended air particles, inanimate objects like vehicles, or animate intermediates like vectors. The airborne transmission, it occurs when infectious agents are carried by dust or droplet nuclei suspended in air. Airborne dust induces material that has settled on surfaces and become resuspended by air currents as well as infectious particles blown from soil and by the wind. So the vehicle-borne transmission, the vehicles are indirectly transmitted and infectious agents include food, water, biological products like blood, and fomites, the inanimate objects such as handkerchiefs, bedding, or surgical scalpels that are found in the hospital. So the vector-borne transmission in the HAI include such as mosquitoes, fleas, and ticks, which may carry an infectious agent through purely mechanical means or may support growth or changes in the agent. Examples of mechanical transmission: the flies carrying Shigella or their appearances and fleas carrying Yersinia pestis, the causative agent of plague in their gut. In biological transmission, the causative agent of malaria or guinea worm undergoes maturation in an intermediate host before it can be transmitted to humans. So the agents of healthcare associated infections include various bacteria, fungi, and viruses. So the predisposing factors for HAI include age, the severity of illness, and the medical conditions, the immunocompromised individuals, the malnutrition, and the obesity of the patient, if the patient is obese. So the common sites of healthcare associated infection in the hospital environment include the patients in the labor room and the intensive care unit, and the patients undergoing invasive procedures or operation, and the areas of hospital with poor ventilation, the common vehicle and outpatient services, and the residential facilities. Now over to Hussein to explain about the common types of healthcare associated infections.
Good afternoon, doctor. So these are the common types of infection which you can get in healthcare facilities, uh, like pneumonia, urinary tract infection, bloodstream infection, and surgical site infection. So first come to pneumonia. So pneumonia could be caused by ventilator. If a person is on ventilator, he or she may get infected if germs enter through the tube and get into the patient's lung. They are associated with a high rate of mortality and morbidity. Patients with mechanically assisted ventilation have high risk of developing healthcare associated pneumonia. But a short term use of ventilators does not contain major risk. Prolonged ventilation use can cause pneumonia. And uh, also, ventilator associated pneumonia remains one of the most common cause of nosocomial infection and death in the ICU. It is most commonly caused by Acinetobacter. Now, coming to urinary tract infection. A urinary tract infection is an infection involving any part of the urinary system, including urethra, bladder, ureters, and kidney. Among UTIs acquired in the hospital, approximately 75% are associated with a urinary catheter, which is a tube insert it into the bladder through the urethra to drain urine. This catheter is usually used after surgeries to help patients to urinate, like when a patient has a, and if it is like the most important risk factor for developing a catheter associated urinary tract infection is prolonged use of urinary catheter. Like when a patient has a bladder weakness or nerve damage or a paralyzed patient, so he or she may have to use this urinary catheter for a long period of time. And because of this patient may develop catheter associated urinary tract infection. So these patients should be checked regularly for any infection and can be advised to have a suprapubic catheter if possible. If a patient is quadriplegic, so he or she can have a suprapubic catheter. And if a patient only needs a catheter for a short period of time, like minor abdominal surgery or childbirth with an epidural, so he can so it can be removed as soon as they are not needed. Now coming to bloodstream infections. In bloodstream infection, central line associated bloodstream infections are the major cause of death, resulting in thousands of deaths each year. Now the impact on patient outcome is tremendous. The central line is used when a patient needs drug through veins over a long period of time or when needs dialysis. So this infection can be really life-threatening to patients. So guidelines should be properly followed while doing this procedure. And BSI increases the mortality rate, prolongs patient stay in the ICU and in the hospital, and generates substantial extra cost. Now coming to the surgical site infection. A surgical site infection is an infection that occurs after surgery in the part of the body where the surgery took place. Surgery site infections can sometimes be superficial infections involving the skin only. Other surgical site infections are more serious and can involve tissue under the skin, organ, or implanted material. Surgical site infections remain a substantial cause of morbidity, prolonged hospitalization, and death. Prevention of HIs. Now, there are three principal goals for HAI control and prevention program. First is protect the patient. Second is protect the healthcare workers, visitors, and others in the healthcare environment. And third, accomplish the previous two goals in a cost-effective and cost-efficient manner whenever possible. Now, prevention and control of HAI. Observance of aseptic technique. This technique and procedure helps help patients from dangerous germs, bacteria, virus. Then frequent hand washing, especially between patients. Before examining the next patient, you should always wash your hands. Cleaning and disinfection of linen and furniture. Sterilization of equipments. Patient's isolation. Like if a patient has TB or COVID, he or she should be isolated from other patients. Then avoidance of medical procedures that can lead to HI. Like if a patient has a minor surgery for hernia and has been given an epidural, so he or she should not be inserted with catheter as he will automatically start to urinate after a few hours. So if possible, urinary catheter can be avoided. You should wear gloves, which will provide a protective barrier and prevent contamination of hands, reduce likelihood that microorganisms present on hands will be transmitted to patients during procedure. Gown. Wear a gown to prevent soiling of clothing and skin during procedure that are likely to generate splashes of blood, body fluids, secretions, or excretion. The sterile gown is required only for aseptic procedures, and for the rest, a clean non-sterile gown is sufficient. Remove the soiled gown as soon as possible with care to avoid contamination. Now, use mask, eye protection, or face shield. Wear a mask and adequate eye protection or a face shield to protect mucous membrane of the eye, nose, and mouth during procedures. And patient care activities that are likely to generate splashes, sprays of blood, and body fluids, etc. Patients, relatives, and healthcare workers presenting with respiratory symptoms should always use mask. Patient care equipment. Used patient care equipment soiled with blood, body fluid, secretion, or excretion should be handled carefully to prevent skin and mucous membrane exposure. contamination of clothing, and transfer of microorganisms to healthcare workers, other patients, or the environment. Ensure that reusable equipment is not used for the care of another patient until it has been cleaned and sterilized appropriately. Ensure that single-use items and sharps are discarded properly. Now, utmost care should be taken in the following services: housekeeping, dietary services, linen and laundry, central sterile supply department, which is a department which supply equipments to all the other departments. So they should keep in mind to sterilize all the equipments before giving. Nursing care, then waste disposal, and antibiotic policy, which is providing proper evidence-based medicine to the patient. And also keep in mind that the patient, if a patient has any allergy or resistant to certain antibiotics. And last one is hygiene and sanitation. Now, the 5 pillars of infection control are: the first one is isolation and barrier precaution. Like I previously said, that if a patient has COVID or TB, he or she should be given a private ward. Then decontamination of equipments, sterilizing equipments properly after every surgery and procedures. Then prudent use of antibiotics, like rational use of antibiotics, adhering to the local guidelines and medical policies. And as I previously said, that keeping in mind the allergies and resistance of a patient to a certain antibiotic. Then next one is hand wash, then decontamination of environment, like cleaning and disinfecting everything, floor, linen, etc. Now, Purva will continue from here. Thank you.
Now, coming towards the examples of HAI, TB in healthcare workers is one of the common. Then, next slide. The risk of tuberculosis disease among healthcare workers is attributed to the nosocomial transmission calculated as 42 and 1092 based on data from 2 different studies in India. Risk for TB among health workers is consistently higher than general population worldwide. All healthcare personnel with a known exposure to TB disease should receive a TB symptom screen and timely testing if indicated. Healthcare personnel with a previous negative TB test result should be tested immediately and retested 8 to 10 weeks after the last known exposure. For consistency, the same type of TB test, example TB blood test or TB skin test, should be used upon hire, that is pre-placement, and for any follow-up testing. Healthcare personnel with a documented history of a positive TB test result are not needed to be retested after exposure to TB. They should receive a TB symptom screen, and if they have symptoms of TB, they should be evaluated for the TB disease. Now, coming towards the PPE, that is, they should use N95 masks, which are for the high-risk TB areas, TB ward, areas such as TB ward, chest clinic, isolation rooms, as Borki explained earlier, for isolation rooms where special care should be taken, like for COVID, procedure room, example where the sputum induction is done. Then healthcare workers should also use N95 masks, and the patient himself should use a surgical mask. Now, new technologies in hospital infections are the alternative to adjunctive technologies designed to decrease the bioburden in the hospital environment. New technologies to improve cleaning monitoring, new touchless technologies, that is room cleaning robots, hand hygiene monitoring, new technologies, and antimicrobial surfaces. New technologies to improve cleaning monitoring, adenosine triphosphate levels and fluorescent markers have been used as surrogates of contamination to assist in monitoring of cleaning. Fluorescent markers have also been used to teach and test adequacy of hand hygiene. ATP levels represent the organic load or general cleanliness of a surface. Fluorescent markers are placed on surfaces prior to cleaning, then reassessed with black light for their persistence after cleaning efforts. Manual cleaning should remove these markers. New touchless technologies in room cleaning robots. Bypassing the variability in human practices, disinfection devices are now increasingly deployed after manual cleaning to further reduce bioburden in patient rooms. Hydrogen peroxide and UV lighting emitting machines are used. and which allows to remove the organic soil from the surfaces. The HP or UV lights is toxic to humans. Thus, these devices are used only in empty patient rooms where after patients have gone, both devices are able to decrease microbial bioburden on the surfaces. UV and HP devices are costly for now, and so cost effectiveness has not been well established, and they also require human resources. Coming towards the hand hygiene monitoring, which is the new with the new technologies, monitoring and feedback is essential to improve compliance. Traditional monitoring has been direct observation, but this strategy is limited by high resource requirements, low number of observations, and the Hawthorne effect. That is, the patient acts differently when he knows that he is a subject which is being tested on. Now, fully automated monitoring systems are capable of detecting hand hygiene events as healthcare workers enter and exit patient areas, and in some cases may monitor all five of the WHO's moments of hand hygiene. Coming towards the last slide, that is antimicrobial surfaces. Severe antimicrobial coatings are under preclinical study for their potential application to surfaces in healthcare centers. Of these coatings, copper has been studied most extensively. It has been shown to decrease bioburden on surfaces primarily in short-term studies. Copper has also been used in clinical environments, though with conflicting results in terms of ability to prevent hospital-acquired infections. Copper coating of hospital surfaces carries a substantial financial investment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any
What
questions from the floor? Doc
question from the floor? Yes, I'd like to ask if you have also looked into the hospital infection prevention and control guidelines.
Yes, doctor. We looked into the CDC guidelines and WHO guidelines. We took from there only.
Well, what I mean is, what are the or maybe it could be better if you're able to look into one specific example of a certain hospital wherein these guidelines are being implemented. Because you
Okay,
also have to mention that on prevention of hospital-acquired infection, uh, each hospital has its own protocol, right?
yes, doctor.
Yeah, and as you said, these are actually also taken from the CDC. And if you are actually going to be one member of the infection control committee, they actually also have to look into what are their action plan or how often they meet and things like that, because they are the one who's looking or monitoring if this infection control is being observed in hospitals.
Yes, doctor. Some hospitals have infection control teams to monitor their everyday working and prevent infections. But if a hospital is not well funded and local hospitals, so they can adhere to the CDC and WHO guidelines.
You just have to, maybe you could mention it in your report on how we can actually look into these things, both probably, say, for example, a case study in some parts, or maybe some private or public hospitals in India, such like that.
Yes, doctor. Actually, we tried to find some research regarding HAIs in India, but there is no significant research done in HAI. And we also tried to find research in Philippines, but there were no certain studies that will give us the data for HAI infections in hospitals. So
I don't think so, because in fact the Philippines have its own training institutions, training hospitals such as San Lazaro. So these training institutions definitely have a benchmark when it comes to the infection control in the hospitals.
yes, doctor, they do have their guidelines. Yes, I agree with that. They do have their guidelines, but there were no data that what are the ratio of healthcare workers getting infected in certain hospitals or in government hospitals like that.
Okay, you have also to understand that even during the pandemic, um, it was actually also highlighted, no? Infection control. And in fact, this is one of the major factor, especially during the pandemic, no? When it comes to on the transmission of such infection,
Yes, doctor.
right?
Yes, doctor.
Hey, Dr. Andres.
Of course, any nosocomial infection is automatically a morbidity, and you know that morbidity indicators are one um, indicators of our health determinants of on how we deliver quality healthcare. So it is important that we as if your target would be healthcare workers, then this would be a very appropriate lecture to do for them. Okay, good job. Next group.
Good afternoon, doctor. This is group 5. We'll be talking about adolescent health. Before talking about adolescent health, what happens during adolescence? During adolescence, there are major physical development, secondary sexual characteristics development, cognitive development, social development, and gender and sexual development. What happens during physical development? With the beginning of the adolescent, most individuals undergo radical changes, often called the growth spurt. Secondary sexual characteristic development, it is the most important physical change during puberty. It is the emergence of sexual characteristics. Young people now are heading towards their mature size and form, but the pace of development varies markedly across individuals. During cognitive development, there are less immediate visible changes in intellectual growth spurt during this period. Social development, there are major changes which reflects the biological and cognitive development as well as the opportunities of other people's expectations. Now, talking about the adolescent health or youth health, it is the range of approaches to prevent or detect, treat young people's health and well-being. The term adolescent or young people are often used interchangeably, as are the term adolescent health and youth health. Young people's health is often a complex and requires a comprehensive biopsychosocial approach. The word adolescent is origin from a Latin word adolescere, which means to grow into maturity. The puberty, biological changes and sexual maturation during this transition is known as puberty. According to WHO, the age period between 10 to 19 years for both sexes, married or unmarried, is the age of adolescence. The transition happening during this stage also carries significant new and critical risk, but are also associated with opportunities to positively influence and immediate and future health of young people. Adolescence is a period of life with specific health and developmental needs and rights. It is also the time to develop knowledge and skills, learning around managing emotions, relationships, and acquire attributes and ability that will be important for enjoying the adolescent year and assuming adult role. Next slide. What are the importance of adolescent health? Adolescent health is not just a question of individual well-being as the size of adolescent population grows specifically in developing countries. The health of young people will be a major determinant for economic, social development and progress. Not just investing in research, policies, and programs to improve adolescent health, It is also a key strategy to preserve gain in childhood health and ensure that boys and girls grow into healthy and productive men and women. It is a unique stage of human development and an important time for laying the foundations of good health. Adolescents experience rapid physical, cognitive, and psychosocial growth about how they feel, think, make decisions, and interact with the world around them. With sexual maturity and onset of sexual activity, development of adult mental process and adult identity. Next slide. Why are adolescents important? Because they are a demographic force, an economic force, they are the future health, and they have the right to participate. Next slide. Stages of adolescence. There are three primary developmental stages of adolescence. Early adolescent, that ages from 11 to 13, middle adolescent, age from 14 to 16, late adolescent, age from 17 to 19. What happens in the early adolescent? Puberty begins at this stage. It is characterized by spurt of growth and the beginning of sexual maturation. Adolescents at this age tend to have concrete, black and white, all or nothing thinking and a limited capacity for abstract thoughts. People may be egocentric, and children at this age may be self-conscious about their appearance, apprehensive about being judged by their peers. Next slide, please. Middle adolescent. The main physical changes gets completed in the middle adolescent, while the individual develops a strong sense of identity and relates more strongly to his or her peer group. The importance of peer group in middle adolescence is that no doubt their peers are very important during this phase. People spend increasingly amount of time with their companies, increases focus on peer relationship and as a crucial sense to their identity. Thinking becomes more reflective, less time is spent with the family and more time is spent with friends. Teens become more self-involved, appearances are important, and peer pressure can peak at this stage. Later adolescence. The body takes its adult form in later adolescence, while the individual now has a distinct identity and more settled ideas and opinions. In this stage, young people become able to think about ideas rationally, have impulse controls on delayed gratification, plan for future. They have stronger sense of identity and individuality and can identify their own values. Adolescent demography worldwide. There are more adolescents in the world than ever before. That is 1.2 billion, totaling 1/6 of the global population. This number is expected to rise through 2050, particularly in low and middle income countries, where close to 90% of 10 to 19-year-old live. An estimated of 1.1 million adolescents die each year. Approximately 85% live in developing countries, among which most are healthy, but there are still significant death, illness, disease among adolescents. Promoting healthy practices during adolescence and taking steps to better protect young people from health risks are critical for prevention. Adolescent health in India. India has the largest adolescent population in the world, that is 253 million, and among which every fifth person is between age of 10 to 19. The fertility rate is high in India, and adolescent unsafe motherhood, that is maternal mortality rate and infant mortality rate. No, there are very low knowledge about family planning and healthy sexuality. Approximately 19.8% of women in age group of 15 to 19 are pregnant. Age-specific fertility rate for 15 to 19 age group is 107 upon 1,000. Contraceptive use among married adolescents among the same age group is 7%. Half of them suffer from nutritional anemia. Young people aged between 10 to 25 years make up 50% of all new HIV infections. Adolescent health in Philippines. Adolescents comprise 30% of Philippine population and are directly implicated in country's development perspectives. However, adolescents as a developmental period have been treated unsystematically and virtually neglected in Philippine psychology research. Violence is prevalent at this age. Approximately 16%, that is 16.6% of women aged 15 to 19 have experienced physical violence at least once in their life, and 4.4% are the survivors of sexual violence. Malnutrition is a double burden, with 12.4% of adolescent raise and 8.3% are overweight or obese. The sexual and reproductive health issues are growing cause for concern. In 2013, National Demographic and Health Survey places adolescent age-specific fertility rate at 57 live births per 1,000 women aged 15 to 19 years, up from 54 in 2008 National Demographic Health Survey.
Main health issue faced by adolescents globally. The first one is injuries, unintentional injuries. It is the leading cause of death and disability. The next is road traffic accidents, most common among cyclists and motor wheelers. Then drowning, top cause of death among adolescents. According to WHO 2019, over 115,000 adolescents died due to road traffic accidents, and more than 30,000 died as a result of drowning. Interventions to prevent injuries like enforcement of road safety laws, prohibiting driving under the influence of alcohol and drugs, then driver license, then teaching children and adolescents to swim. The next is violence. Fourth leading cause of death globally consists of bullying, sexual violence, and sexual abuse. According to the Global Based Student Health Survey, about 42% of adolescent boys and about 37% of adolescent girls are exposed to bullying. Violence during adolescence also increases the risk of injury, mental health problems, poor school performance, and dropout. So intervening it early can help with the physical and psychosocial consequences. Some measures of prevention of violence are promoting parenting and early childhood development, addressing school-based bullying, programs that develop life and social skills, community that approaches to reduce access to alcohol and firearms, and empathic care for violence survivor. Mental health. One of the leading cause of illness, that is depression and suicide, the third leading cause of death among 15 to 19 years of age. It accounts for 16% of the global burden of disease and injury. Factors that have impacted are poverty, stigma, exclusion, trauma, loss of a loved one, academic pressure, bullying, and chronic illness. The consequences of not addressing adolescents' mental age condition can extend to adulthood, and it can impair one physically and mental health and limit the quality of life as an adult. So if problems arise, they should be detected and timely managed by a competent and caring health workers. Interventions like building socioeconomic skills, providing psychosocial supports, program to help strengthen the ties between the adolescents and the families and improve the quality of home environment. Alcohol and drugs abuse. It is one of the major concerns in many countries globally. According to WHO, there are currently 155 million adolescents who are drinkers among the age group of 15 to 19 years, and with males most at risk. Cannabis is the most widely used psychoactive drugs among the young people, and people who use this alcohol and who are drugs abuse have reduced self-control, increased risk-taking behavior like reckless driving, unsafe sex, undesirable aggressive behaviors, and it can also cause neurocognitive alterations leading to behavioral changes, social and academic problems. And adolescents can be influenced to drinking and alcohol by access to alcohol and drugs from parents or others, having peers who drinks or use drugs excessively, or parental relationship and attitudes towards alcohol. Interventions like enforcing a law of minimum age for buying and consuming alcohol, eliminating marketing and advertising to minors, parental or school education, parental strict guidelines, and surrounding yourself with non-drinkers. STD. STD can affect any individual of all ages, but it most likely take a heavy toll on young people. Like youth or adolescents of ages 15 to 24 are more commonly affected. Most common are gonorrhea, chlamydia, syphilis, trichomoniasis, chancroid, genital herpes, genital warts, HIV, and hepatitis B infection. A large number of adolescents and young adults are generally unaware of being unaffected. Like adolescents are also especially vulnerable to sexual risks because they are undergoing this rapid cognitive, behavioral, emotional, and social development. So targeting youth who are using this emerging digital technology is important for ensuring sexual health equity for adolescents. And like adolescents should know how to protect themselves from HIV infections or how to able to obtain or assess HIV prevention interventions like condoms or pre-exposure prophylaxis. And if they're infected, how to do HIV testing and proper treatment services. Tobacco use. Use of tobacco is generally started in adolescent stage. According to the CDC, 9 out of 10 adults who smoke daily first started by the age of 18 and 99% tried first by the age 26. In 2021, 80.2% of high school students and 74.6% of middle school students use tobacco products and flavored tobacco products. In India, highly addictive tobacco drug disguised as a mouth freshener is commonly used by the adolescents. Interventions like prohibitions of the sale of tobacco, banning tobacco advertisement, and ensuring tobacco-free, smoke-free environment. Nutrition and micronutrients deficiencies. Common nutritional deficiencies in adolescents are iron, zinc, calcium, folate, and iodine, with iron deficiency the most common. Nutritional deficiencies occurs mainly because of irregular meals and snacking, skipping meals, eating away from home, following alternative dietary patterns, inadequate intake, poor absorption, increased requirement, and loss of nutrients, poor utilizations of nutrients, or infection, poverty, or practicing food taboos that could lead to a reduced food intake. So healthy eating during adolescence is very important as body changes and an insatiable appetite as rapid growth requires a lot of energy. But excessive eating of high calorie food or sedentary lifestyle can outweigh any metabolic. And so interventions like developing healthy eating habits, nutrients and exercise counseling, or encouragement of body positivity and self-image. Undernutrition and obesity. Malnutrition causes wasting, stunting, underweight, vitamins, and mineral deficiencies. Undernutrition makes the children and adolescents more vulnerable to disease and death. People become overweight, and when they consume food and drinks that are high in sugar and fats and tend to engage less in physical activities. Unhealthy diets and poor nutrition can lead to a non-communicable disease and are the major risk factor globally. Every country in the world is affected one or more by one more forms of malnutrition, and combating malnutrition in all its forms is one of the greatest global health challenges, and poverty amplifies the risks of it. Early pregnancy and childbirth. Approximately 12 million girls aged 15 to 19 years and at least 707,000 under 15 years of age 15 years give birth each year in the developing countries. And the leading cause of death is due to complications from pregnancy and childbirth. Adolescent pregnancies more commonly occurs in marginalized community, commonly driven by poverty, lack of education, and employment opportunities. Factors that contribute to the adolescent pregnancies and childbirth are under pressure to marry and bear children early. Like in many places, girls choose to become pregnant because they have limited educations and employment prospects. Often in such societies, motherhood or childbearing becomes the best limited options available. And facing barriers to accessing contraceptives, including like restrictive law based on the age or the marital status, sexual violence, lack of education, peer pressure, media influence of the so-called teen mom, then drugs and alcohol, and traditions and customs of early marriage. Adolescents may want to avoid pregnancies, but they may not be able to do so due to lack of or due to knowledge gaps or misconception or where to obtain these contraceptive methods or how to properly use them. And babies born to mother under 20 years of age face higher risks of low birth than preterm delivery and severe neonatal conditions. So interventions like need and have a right to comprehensive sexual education, organizing sex education programs, curriculum-based process of teaching and learning about the cognitive, emotional, physical, and social aspects of sexuality, then better access to contraceptives, informations and services, and laws specifying a certain age of marriage. And the Philippines has raised its age of sexual consent from 12 to 16 years to protect the children against abuse, exploitations, and discrimination, which is gender neutral. And in the same case in India, it's from 18 years. multifactorial causations of adolescents' health problem. Underlying cause like gender-based discrimination, poverty, and immediate cause like unsafe or unsupportive environment, families, and friends. In high-risk behavior like psychological, physiological, all these can cause an adolescent's health problem.
Next slide, please. Prevention of adolescent health problems. Why invest in adolescent health? There are health benefits, economic benefits, and as a human rights also. There are three prevention methods: primary prevention, secondary prevention, and tertiary prevention. The primary preventions are policies, information, and education. Promoting healthy development and establishment of healthy lifestyles and policies and legislations. The primary prevention used for concept of minors, reproductive health and substance abuse and occupational health and accidents and public health. Next slide. The methods of information. One-way communication is radio, television, newspaper, books, and films. Two-way communications are in person or by telephones, etc. Education provide information, intellectual, social, and moral development, enable adolescents to manage their health, guidance on hygiene, exercise, rest, eating, drinking, and sexuality and relationship. Vehicles for healthy education, school, family, and others are health workers, youth organization leaders, and educators. They are knowledgeable and skilled and communication. Next slide. Secondary prevention, that is screening for program for visual and oral health problems and learning disorders, illness, and risk behaviors. Through schools, workplaces, and youth organizations, make service more accessible to young health care providers must listen to respect adolescent. Counseling and guidance centers, especially for adolescents, that focus on sexual and reproductive health, substance abuse, mental health problems, and violent behavior. Territory preventions. There are treatment and rehabilitations, that is curative service along with education and information on causes, rehabilitation, develop physically, psychologically, and socially, cooperation between sectors. Next slide. Health program for adolescent in Philippines. The Adolescent Health and Development Program, AHD, is one of the key component programs of Philippine Population Management Program. The overall goal of Adolescent Health Development Program is to contribute to prevent yearly and repeated pregnancy, reduce by half the portion of adolescents who have become childbearing, reduced by proportion of repeat pregnancies. Next slide. As the government agency tasked to manage adolescent health and development program, the communication on population and development as following the strategies outlined in its directional plan. Comprehensive sexuality education in schools and in alternative learning systems using interactive and peer-to-peer communication strategies. Setting up of functional and sustainable teen centers in every city and municipalities, enabling parents, youth leaders, and other adult groups to effectively guide adolescents in forming responsible sexuality. Optimizing new information communication technologies to reach out to adolescents in online and digital media. Enabling local government units and civil society organizations and private sector to improve access adolescents to appropriate reproductive health information and service. Developing and implementing local policies and programs to prevent exposure of adolescents to risky behaviors. Example, drinking, smoking, and drug users. Over to Manasa.
Two health programs that were launched for adolescents in India are Baliki Samriddhi Yojana. This was launched by the government of India in 1997 target group of this yojana is the girl child below poverty line families who were born or are born before or after, born after August 15, 1997. The objectives are to change negative family and community attitudes towards the girl child at birth and towards her mother, to improve enrollment and retention of girl children in schools, to increase the age of marriage of girls, and to assist the girl to undertake income generation activities. And these are implemented both in rural and in urban areas. The next is Adolescent Reproductive Sexual Health Program. This program offers information and counseling on developmental changes, personal care, and ways of seeking help. Reproductive health, including contraceptives, sexually transmitted infection treatment, pregnancy care, and post-absorption management. It also includes voluntary counseling, testing for HIV, management of sexual violence, and mental health services, including management of substance abuse. This was targeted both for adolescent male and females. The other one is Kishori Shakti Yojana. This was a special intervention for adolescent girls using the Integrated Child Development Scheme. And this was put into operation from November 1991. It aimed to break the cycle of nutritional and gender disadvantage to provide a supportive atmosphere for self-development. All unmarried girls from the ages of 11 to 18 whose family had an income below 6,400 per annum, which is very low in the rural areas, were beneficiaries of this program. Services included were educational activities through non-formal and function literacy pattern, immunization, general health checkup every 6 months, treatment for minor ailments, deworming, prophylaxis measures against anemia, goiter, vitamin deficiencies, etc. So, Kishori Shakti Yojana also aimed at empowering adolescent girls so as to enable them to take charge of their lives. Adolescent girls who are unmarried and belong to families below the poverty line and school dropouts were selected and attached to the local Anganwadi centers for learning and training activities. Non-formal education was provided to these girls, and also emphasis on life education aspects, including physical, developmental, and sex education was given. Kishori Shakti Yojana had two different schemes. So the first scheme was girl to girl approach. It was for targeted towards adolescent females at the ages of 11 to 15 years, and they belong to BPL families who earn 6,400 per annum. There was a scheme too called the Balika Mandal, which was aimed towards girls at 11 to 18 years of age, irrespective of their income levels, and also 11 to 15 years of age girls who belong to poorer families. Another policy by the government was the National Youth Policy 2003. This reiterated the commitment of the entire nation to the composite and all-round development of the young sons and daughters of India, which seek to establish an all-India perspective to fulfill their legitimate aspirations so that they are all strong of heart and strong of body and mind in successfully accomplishing the challenging tasks of national reconstruction and social changes that lie ahead. So comprehensive view of youth issues were divided into rural and tribal youth, out of school youth, and female adolescents. Another program was the Adolescent Girls Scheme. The scheme was devised in 2010 for adolescent girls of the age group 11 to 14, and it offered a supportive environment for the self-development of adolescent girls in the country. There were two major components under the scheme, which is the nutrition component and the non-nutrition component. The nutrition component had a take-home ration or hot cooked meal for 11 to 14 years out of school girls. It provided certain protein recommended daily recommended intake. Also, it has the non-nutrition component for out of school adolescent girls, which was provided 2 to 3 times a week at the ages of 11 to 14. They were provided with iron and folic acid supplementation, health checkup and referral services, nutrition and health education, counseling, guidance on family welfare, life skill education, and accessing public health services. Adolescent nutrition and IFA supplement, nutrition education to generate awareness and balanced diet, nutritious food, and effects on malnutrition, nutrition education sessions through Kishori Divas, ICDS, school curriculum, and also linkage with Sakshar Bharat Abhiyan. Child health screening and early intervention services, which was screening of adolescents for low body mass index and counseling at adolescent health clinics. The IFA tablet, which is the iron and folic acid supplementation. It is a national iron and initiative program for management of anemia. Adolescents at the age of 10 to 19 years within school, weekly iron and folic acid supplementation was given to these children, which was comprised of a blue color tablet. Next slide. Another scheme that was provided by the government is the WIFS, which is the weekly iron and folic acid supplementation scheme. This comprised of students in the grades of 7 to 9, 6 to 9, and this addressed the nutrition anemia among students. The key features of this scheme was weekly supervised administration of IFA iron 100 mg and folic acid of 500 microgram, screening of target group for anemia and referral, biannual deworming, information and counseling for improved dietary intake and prevention of worm infestation. Adolescent-friendly health services in India are the PHC and CHC, where the service provider is a medical officer. The target was adolescent unmarried boys and girls, and the activity was conducted once a week at a teen clinic organized for 2 hours.
The services provided in adolescent clinic services are the general examination, nutrition advice, detect and treat anemia, antenatal care and advice regarding childbirth, STIs detection and treatment, HIV detection and counseling, treatment of psychosomatic problems, addiction. Next. Life skills. These are the definition by WHO, the ability for adaptive and positive behavior that enable individuals to deal effectively with the demands and challenges of everyday life. And by UNICEF, a behavior change and behavior development approach designed to address a balance of 3 areas: knowledge, attitude, and skills. How life skills lead to primary prevention of health problems. Knowledge, attitude, and values creates life skills, and then behavior reinforcement or change, then positive health behavior to the prevention of health problems. What are life skills? Decision making and problem solving, creative and critical thinking, negotiation skills, effective communication and interpersonal relationship, self-awareness, empathy, coping with stress and emotions. Life skills and education are incorporated through schools, ICDS, and community outreach sessions. Teaching through participatory learning methods like games, role play, group discussion, and practicing skills through experimental learning in a non-threatening setting. It provides individuals with wide alternative ways of solving problems pertaining to drug use, sexual abuse, teenage pregnancy, early sexual experimentation, and bullying. The importance of adolescent immunization. Prevention and control of disease is important for healthy growth. Routine immunization also provides chance for a health visit. It gives further chance for preventive services and health counseling. So this is the IAP adolescent immunization schedule for tetanus booster at 10 and 16 years old, rubella as per of MMR vaccine, 1 dose to girls at 12 to 13 years of age if not given earlier. MMR, 1 dose at 12 to 13 years of age. Hepatitis B, 3 doses, 0, 1, and 6 months if not given earlier. Typhoid, TAVI or oral typhoid vaccine given 3 years. Varicella, 1 dose up to 12 to 13 years and 2 doses after 13 years of age. Hepatitis A, 2 doses, 0 and 6 months. if not given earlier. Barriers that deter adolescent utilization of health services. 1. The fear that health workers may ask difficult questions, conduct unpleasant procedures, uncomfortable with health workers, concern about confidentiality, long waiting hours, parental consent required, lack of information about needs and risks available services, operational barriers, that is the cost, location, timing. Guiding principles for adolescent health program. Adolescence is a time for opportunity and risk. Not all adolescents are equally vulnerable. Adolescent development underlies prevention of health problems. Problems have common roots and are interrelated. Social environment influences adolescent behavior. Gender considerations are fundamental. How to improve healthcare services for adolescents, to introduce and inculcate adolescent-friendly policies, which are to fulfill the rights of adolescents, account for special group, include vulnerable and undeserved groups, pay attention to gender factor, uphold privacy and confidentiality, and are free and affordable. To provide adolescent-friendly procedures, A is easy registration, retrieval, and storage of records. B is for short waiting time, and C is consultation with or without appointments. To provide adolescents-friendly health facilities and healthcare providers, we should provide safe environment and convenient locations, provide information and educational material, privacy and avoid stigma, have enough facilities to providers must be technically competent, must be non-judgmental and considerate, and will devote adequate time to treat clients with equal care and respect and provide information and support. How to improve healthcare services for adolescents. The quality of care framework provides a useful working definition of adolescent-friendly health services. To be considered adolescent-friendly, health services should be accessible, acceptable, equitable, appropriate, and effective, as outlined below. Number 1, accessible. Adolescents are able to obtain the health services that are available. Number 2, acceptable. Adolescents are willing to obtain the health services that are available. Equitable, all adolescents, not just selected groups, are able to obtain the health services that are available. 4 is appropriate. The right health services, that is the ones that need, are provided to them. Effective, the right health services are provided in the right way and make a positive contribution to the health. These are the group members. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Very expansive topic. What you could have done would be chosen, you could have chosen a particular issue of the adolescent and focus on that rather than try to fit it all in one lecture. Of course, your audience will not listen to its entirety if you bombard them with all the data that you give, although very comprehensive report what you have done. Any questions from the floor? Any questions? Okay, next group, prepare. How many groups do we still have?
5 more, doctor.
5 more. Can we have that next week? Is it okay with you? Since it's already 5, I have
Okay,
next.
doctor. Okay, doctor.
We'll have
Okay, doctor.
the next 5 groups for the 19th.
Sure, doctor.
19, yeah. Thank you for the presenters. For those who will present, you could tweak your reports a little bit. focus on what you would want to convey. Usually a public health lecture would just last 15 minutes to for long. Okay. And then focus on a few things you think on what is important. All right. So that you would have an effective public health teaching. All right. See you next Tuesday. Is Dr. Elray Navarro still here? Okay. See you next Tuesday. You may leave this call.